Victor Kellan had no business being out in that storm, but when your 5-year-old son is running a fever and the pharmacy closes in 20 minutes, you don't wait for the rain to stop. He was halfway down the narrow road behind the grocery store shortcut, clutching a soaked paper bag of children's medicine, when he saw her crumpled on the ground beside a black SUV. One heel snapped, her face pale under the streetlight. "Are you okay?" he called out, dropping to his knees beside her. She winced as she tried to sit up. "I think my ankle's twisted." "Don't move," he said quickly, pulling off his jacket and wrapping it around her soaked shoulders. "I'll get you to the clinic. It's just 10 minutes away." "I can call someone," she muttered, reaching for her purse, but her hand trembled too hard to grip it. Victor didn't wait. He scooped her up into his arms, ignoring the way her wet curls stuck to his neck and how her perfume, something soft and expensive, clung to his shirt. "Trust me, we'll get you looked at." She blinked, stunned. "Do you always rescue strangers in alleyways?" He gave a tired laugh. "Only when they look like they need it." He didn't ask questions. He just got her into his beat-up truck, turned the heat all the way up, and drove. The rain pounded the windshield, the roads were slick, and the truck groaned like it might fall apart at any moment, but she didn't complain once. She sat there, cradling her ankle, watching him with curious eyes. "I'm Victor," he said finally, glancing at her between wiper sweeps. "And that's not usually how I introduce myself, but tonight's been special." She gave a soft smile. Brielle Keaton. The name meant nothing to him. It should have. It was splashed across billboards and magazines, tied to one of the biggest luxury chains in the country. But Victor didn't follow headlines. He followed shifts at the auto shop, school pickups, and coupon deals. By the time they got to the clinic, the rain had slowed, but her ankle had swollen badly. "You didn't have to carry me," she whispered as he lifted her again. "You couldn't walk. And I don't see anyone else around," he said. Inside, the clinic receptionist recognized Victor immediately. "Back again? Let me guess, Wesley this time." "No, not this time," he said, nodding toward Brielle. "She needs help." They got her checked out. Sprained ankle, nothing broken. Still, the doctor told her to rest a few days. Keep weight off it, use crutches. "I'll call a car," she said after, reaching for her phone. Victor glanced at the clock. It was almost 9. "No car's gonna get out here that fast tonight. You're welcome to come back to my place and wait until morning. I've got a couch. It's clean. I have a kid, so." "No funny business." She looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to read something behind his eyes. "I don't usually do things like this," she said quietly. "Neither do I," he replied. She hesitated, then gave a slow nod. "Okay." Back at the small house, Wesley was asleep on the couch, wrapped in a superhero blanket. Victor gently picked him up and laid him in his bedroom. When he came back out, Brielle was staring at the room's faded walls, a table with one wobbly leg, a fridge held closed with duct tape. "I know it's not much," he said. She turned to him, eyes soft. "It's more than you had to give." He left her with a blanket and crutches and went to sleep on the floor beside Wesley's bed. The next morning, she was already up, limping around his tiny kitchen with a cup of coffee in her hand. "You didn't have to make that," he said, rubbing his eyes. "I didn't. I found it already brewed. You do mornings well." Victor chuckled. "Only because I don't have a choice." Wesley stumbled out next, rubbing his eyes. As soon as he saw Brielle, he froze. "Who's that?" "This is Brielle. She hurt her foot last night. She's staying a bit till her ride comes." Wesley looked at her, then back at his dad. "She's pretty." Victor laughed, embarrassed. "Okay, buddy, that's enough." But Brielle knelt down, even on her bad ankle, and held out her hand. "Hi, Wesley. I think you're pretty cool, too." The boy grinned. She didn't leave that morning, said her ride was delayed. Then in the afternoon, said maybe she'd stay another night just to rest up. By the third day, Wesley was asking if she could stay forever. Victor wasn't sure what was happening. She cooked breakfast one morning, then helped Wesley with his homework, then asked Victor why he never smiled when he talked about himself. "You always talk about your kid, about work, like you're just surviving," she said. He looked at her. "Isn't that what life is?" "Not mine," she said softly. He didn't realize what she meant until 2 nights later, he came home to find a slick black car parked outside his house. A man in a suit stood by the door. "Miss Keaton," the man said, giving her a nod. "Your meetings have been rescheduled. The board's waiting." Victor blinked. "Wait. What board?" The man looked at Victor like he was gum on his shoe. She's the CEO of Keaton Lux. You didn't know? Victor turned to Brielle, stunned. I didn't lie, she said gently. I just didn't bring it up. You're rich? He asked, dumbfounded. I'm more than that, but yeah, she said. I run a company. I've got a penthouse and a driver and a lot of people who want me to be someone I'm not. He didn't know what to say. She stepped closer. I needed a break. I needed real, and you gave me that, Victor. You didn't know who I was. You just helped me. He folded his arms, unsure. So what now? You go back to your world and forget about mine? She looked at him, eyes shining. Not if you don't want me to. He hesitated. But Wesley ran up and wrapped his arms around her. Don't leave. Victor swallowed hard, his heart thudding. And in that moment, he knew she wasn't a CEO to him. She was the woman who made coffee in his kitchen, who laughed at his jokes, who sat on his torn couch and listened. She was Brielle, and he didn't want her to go. You don't owe me anything, Victor said, his voice low as the sleek car waited in silence by the curb. Brielle stood still, her coat draped over her arm, the wind catching strands of her hair. I'm not offering out of guilt. I didn't say you were, but you think it, she replied. That I'm just some rich woman trying to pay back a kindness before I disappear. Victor leaned against the porch rail, arms crossed. Aren't you? Her eyes narrowed. You think I'm that hollow, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. I think you live in a different world than I do. And I've got a kid who doesn't understand the difference yet. I'm not trying to confuse him. You being here at all confuses him. Brielle didn't reply right away. A plane cut across the sky overhead, leaving a faint trail behind it. She watched it until it vanished. I didn't plan for any of this, she said quietly. I was supposed to be in Milan this week, but I couldn't do it. Not another boardroom, another set of rehearsed answers. I needed to breathe. And then I found myself here in the middle of a storm, and you didn't ask me anything except if I was okay. Victor's jaw tightened. You say that like it means something. It does, she said, stepping closer. Because nobody ever sees me as just someone who might be hurting. They see a name. A title, a bank account. You saw a person. Victor didn't move. And what does that mean now? It means I don't want to walk away pretending this didn't change something. Before he could respond, Wesley pushed the front door open behind him, eyes darting between the two of them. Can we all eat dinner together again? He asked, tugging the sleeve of Victor's shirt. Like we did yesterday. Victor didn't answer, but Brielle crouched down despite the ache in her ankle and smiled. Only if your dad says yes. Victor looked away, his throat working. Let's go inside. That night she stayed for dinner, not because the car broke down or a ride was delayed. She stayed because she wanted to, and Victor let her. She washed dishes while Wesley dried them. Victor leaned against the doorway, silently watching a scene he hadn't realized he missed. A kitchen filled with laughter, not just noise. Later, after Wesley had fallen asleep on the couch during a cartoon, Victor walked Brielle out to the porch. You're not staying again, he said, more statement than question. I'm not sure where I'm going yet. He raised an eyebrow. Didn't that guy say the board's waiting? They always are, she said simply. Doesn't mean I have to show up. He studied her face. You're running. I'm choosing, she corrected. There's a difference. And what are you choosing now? She looked up at him. Something that doesn't come with an agenda. He leaned on the railing again, the boards creaking under his weight. You're not exactly built for quiet towns. You're not exactly built for trust, she shot back, then softened. But I think we both surprised each other. Victor gave a short laugh. You're not wrong. I don't have all the answers, she said, but I'd like to come back tomorrow. If that's all right. He hesitated, then nodded once. We'll be here. She gave him a look one he hadn't seen from her before. Not flirtation, not gratitude, just something honest and unguarded. The next morning, she returned before Victor had even finished packing Wesley's lunch. I brought breakfast, she said, holding up a box from a downtown bakery. And no, I didn't make it. You already know better. Victor chuckled. You bribing my kid now? I'm bribing both of you. That morning was different. She didn't just sit on the couch or help with dishes. She asked questions about Victor's work, about Wesley's school, about the neighborhood. You ever think about doing something else? She asked as they sat on the porch while Wesley played in the yard. Victor shrugged. Thought doesn't pay the bills. But if it could, he looked at her wary. What are you getting at? She pulled a folded paper from her coat. This is a contract for a full restoration on one of my grandfather's old cars. It's sitting in a garage in Atlanta. Needs someone who can bring it back to life. I remembered you said you worked on classics before. Victor stared at the paper, then back at her. You're offering me a job, I'm offering you a project, with pay, real pay. He shook his head. You can't just hire me because we had a few dinners and your driver thinks I'm decent. This has nothing to do with dinners, she said firmly. And my driver thinks you're intimidating. Victor laughed despite himself. Good, she leaned in. This is me, trying to meet you somewhere in the middle. I can't turn off my life, Victor, but I can choose who I bring into it and how. He glanced toward the yard where Wesley was building a lopsided fort out of sticks and cardboard. I'll think about it, he said. Fair enough. She stood to leave but paused on the steps. I'm not going to push, but I'm not going to disappear either. That night, Victor stared at the contract long after Wesley had gone to bed. He read every word twice. The money was real. The work was familiar. The terms were clean. But he didn't care about any of that as much as he cared about what it meant. That Brielle wasn't just passing through. The next day, he showed up at the address she'd scribbled on the envelope. It wasn't a corporate tower. It was a modest office above an old bookstore. She was sitting cross-legged on a couch, reading something with a red cover. You came, she said, lowering the book. I have questions, she smiled. Then ask. He did. For hours about the work, the expectations, her. At the end of it, she didn't try to persuade him. She just walked him to the door, handed him a key to the garage, and said, no pressure, just possibility. He took the key, and for the first time in a long while, Victor Kellan didn't feel like surviving. He felt like something better might actually be starting. Victor stood outside the garage Brielle had given him access to, the cold metal key still pressed into his palm. The building loomed before him quiet, unassuming, and far bigger than any place he'd ever worked in. Inside, the air was thick with dust and time. A single tarp-covered shape waited in the center, surrounded by shelves of untouched tools and boxes labeled in neat handwriting. He stepped forward and peeled back the tarp. The car beneath was a 1961 Aston Martin DB4. The body was dulled, the chrome pitted, but it still held a kind of quiet majesty. He let out a slow breath. Restoring it would take weeks of precision, patience, and parts that didn't come cheap, but it was the kind of challenge he hadn't touched in years. He found a note tucked under the windshield wiper in Brielle's handwriting. No deadline, just do it right. Victor laughed under his breath. There wasn't a shop in the city that would trust someone like him with something that rare, let alone do it without hovering, second-guessing, or trying to take the wheel. She hadn't just given him work, she'd handed him control. By the time he finished his initial inspection of the car, the sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the floor. He called his neighbor, Miss Annie, to check in on Wesley. She had already fed him and was letting him pick a movie. Victor's voice softened. Tell him I'll be back before it ends. He returned home to find Brielle sitting on the porch steps, Wesley curled up beside her, fast asleep with his head against her shoulder. She looked up, her expression unreadable. He wanted to wait for you. Victor bent to take his son in his arms, gently lifting him without waking him. You didn't have to stay. I know, she said. Inside, he tucked Wesley into bed, then returned to find her still on the porch, watching the stars edge out across the sky. I saw the car, he said. I thought it might be your kind of thing. It is, he said, but it's more than that. She looked over, waiting. It's the first time someone's trusted me with something that matters in a long time, he said. I didn't give it to you out of charity. I know. That's why it means something. She pulled her knees up, resting her arms on them. You know, the garage used to belong to my grandfather. He rebuilt engines in the summers and taught me how to change oil when I was 8. The board wanted to sell it off. Said it had no revenue potential, but I couldn't let it go. Victor sat beside her. So why give me the key? Because I wanted it to have purpose again, and I think you're the only one who'd treat it with the kind of respect he would have wanted. He nodded slowly. You talk about him a lot. He raised me. My parents were too busy flying to Tokyo and Zurich to remember birthdays, she said, her voice thin. He told me to find people who didn't care about what I had, only about who I was. Victor glanced at her. You think I'm one of those people? I think you didn't flinch when I dropped my last name, she said, and you never once asked me for anything. I've got everything I need, he said. She turned toward him. That's rare. They sat in silence for a moment, the cool night air settling around them. Victor broke it. Are you always running from your world when it gets too loud? She stiffened slightly. I used to think I was just taking breaks. Now I'm not so sure. He looked out over the yard, watching the wind ripple across the grass. And what happens when the board starts asking questions you can't ignore? They already have, she admitted. I postponed a shareholders' meeting and moved the executive retreat. They're starting to circle, and you're still here, she nodded. Because for once I want to make a decision that doesn't revolve around quarterly projections or media optics. Victor glanced over at her. And what decision is that? I want to see what this turns into, she said. You, me. Whatever this is. He studied her face. There was no corporate polish in her eyes tonight, just a woman sitting on a porch trying to figure out whether to stay or run. I don't have much to offer, he said. That's a lie, she replied without hesitation. You have everything I've been looking for. The front door creaked open slightly, and Victor turned to see Wesley standing barefoot in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. I forgot to brush my teeth, he mumbled. Victor stood and scooped him up again, carrying him inside. When he returned, Brielle hadn't moved. I should go, she said, though she made no move to stand. You don't have to, he said, his voice quieter now, but if you do, I'll understand. She looked at him with something fragile in her gaze. Would you come with me, just for a day? See my world, Victor blinked. You want me to leave town with you, just for one day, she said. Not as a date, not as anything with pressure, just come see it. I can't leave Wesley. He can come too, she said. I'll make it work, he paused, the idea so completely foreign it didn't feel real. Why? Because I don't want to keep my life in two separate compartments, she said. I want you to see all of it, the chaos, the expectations. The people who think they own me. Victor leaned against the doorframe. You sure? I wouldn't have asked if I wasn't, he nodded. All right, one day. Her smile was slow, almost disbelieving. I'll send the details tomorrow. He watched her walk down the path to the waiting car at the curb. As it pulled away, he stood there for a long time, the porch light casting a soft glow behind him. The next morning, a man in a pressed gray suit knocked on the door precisely at 8. He handed Victor a sealed envelope and a set of plain tickets. Inside was a handwritten note. One day. No suits required. Victor stared at the tickets, first class, direct flight. He turned to Wesley, who was still brushing crumbs off his pajama shirt. Wes, he said, you ever been on a plane? Wesley's eyes lit up. Like in the sky, Victor nodded. Yeah. In the sky, Wesley's grin stretched wide. Do they have juice? Victor laughed. Probably better than anything we've got in the fridge. And just like that, they packed a single duffel bag between them and stepped into something that had never existed in Victor's life before, not just possibility, but the first real taste of a future that didn't feel entirely out of reach. The private jet didn't feel like anything Victor had ever experienced. The floor didn't vibrate. The air smelled like citrus and leather. Wesley sat across from him, wide-eyed, sipping orange juice from a real glass while a steward adjusted the seatbelt around his small frame. Victor kept a hand on the armrest, not because he was afraid of flying, but because the entire situation felt like stepping into someone else's life. Brielle's life. She sat beside him, hair pulled back, no makeup, wearing a soft navy sweater and jeans. There was no boardroom polish, no cameras, no performance, just her. You all right? She asked, glancing at his hand. He nodded once. Just trying not to touch anything too expensive, she smiled. You're allowed to be comfortable. That might take a minute. Wesley leaned over. Dad, this plane has a bathroom with a mirror that has lights around it, like in cartoons. Victor chuckled. Use it before you break it. After they landed, a car waited on the tarmac, sleek and black with interior leather so new it barely creaked. Victor helped Wesley into the back while Brielle climbed in beside him, giving the driver an address he didn't recognize. As they pulled through the gates of a sprawling estate outside of Westchester, Victor leaned forward. This yours? No, she said. It was my grandfather's. I haven't brought anyone here in years. The house was built in the old American-style stone and timber, high windows, ivy crawling along the corners. The lawn stretched forever, dotted with trimmed hedges and trees older than Victor's entire neighborhood. Inside, the air was cool and quiet, the kind of silence that carried memory. Brielle led them down a hallway lined with framed black and white photographs. She paused beneath one of a man in a workshop, his hands covered in grease, a young girl perched on the bench beside him, holding a wrench too big for her hands. "He used to call me Little Bolt," she said. "Taught me how to rebuild a carburetor before I could spell it." Victor studied the photo without speaking. "I didn't bring you here to show off," she said quietly. "I brought you because this is where I remember who I am. Who I was before the boardrooms and the Forbes lists." Victor looked around. "It's quiet." "That's why I kept it," she said. "They wanted to turn it into a venue. I said no." Wesley wandered through the hall, stopping at a window that overlooked a pond surrounded by weeping willows. "Can I go outside?" Victor hesitated. "There's a groundskeeper," Brielle said. "He's been here longer than I've been alive. He'll watch him." Victor gave a nod. "Stay where we can see you." Wesley darted out, his small frame disappearing down the stone steps. Victor turned back to Brielle. "You really don't want to be in that world anymore, do you?" She leaned against the wall. "I thought I did. For a long time, I thought success was supposed to feel like pressure. That being needed meant being valuable. And now I think peace might be worth more." Victor crossed his arms, watching her. "So what happens when they stop listening to your ideas, when they replace you with someone who'll say yes to everything?" She met his gaze. "Then I leave. And I find something else, something real." He didn't speak right away. Outside, Wesley's laughter echoed across the lawn. "That boy doesn't have a mother," Victor said finally. "And I've spent 5 years trying to make sure he never felt the hole she left. I never brought anyone home. Never let anyone too close. Because if they disappeared, I'd have to explain why. I'm not going to disappear." "You can't promise that." "No," she admitted. "But I can promise to stay until you want me to leave." He looked out the window again, the trees swaying gently in the wind. "That's a dangerous promise." "I've made worse," she said. Later that evening, after a quiet dinner in the sunroom and stories shared over pie, Brielle led them into the old garage beside the estate. Dust drifted in slants of golden light as Victor stepped inside. 3 cars sat beneath covers. She pulled one off. It was half-restored, a cherry-red convertible, the chrome half-polished, the engine exposed. "He started this one a year before he passed," she said. "I've had it sitting here ever since." Victor walked around it slowly. "You want this finished. I want this finished by you." He ran a hand along the fender. "It's going to take time." "I'm not in a hurry." He turned to her. "You sure about all this? About me?" She crossed the floor until she was in front of him. "I was sure the moment you carried me through the rain without asking for my name," he exhaled. "I don't know what I'm doing." "Neither do I," she said. "Isn't that kind of perfect?" Victor didn't answer. He just leaned in and kissed her, not because it was expected, not because it was time. Because for the first time in years, nothing else made sense. Weeks passed. The car came to life again under Victor's hands, piece by piece. Wesley played in the yard while Victor worked in the garage. Brielle split her time between meetings and afternoons on the porch, typing reports with her feet bare and her laptop on her knees. One evening, as they sat on the hood of the finished convertible, stars overhead and the old record player humming inside the garage, Brielle reached into her pocket. Victor raised an eyebrow. "You going to propose to me now?" She laughed. "Not yet." She handed him an envelope. Inside, a deed, a transfer of ownership. "Keaton Restoration Garage," he read aloud. "You're the owner now," she said. "I bought the building next to your shop back home, renovated it. It's yours, no ties." He stared at her. "You're giving me a business. I'm giving you your future." Victor blinked, his voice rough. "You always do things this big, only when it matters." He folded the paper carefully. "I told myself I'd never let anyone get too close. Not again. And now," he pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers, "now I don't know how I ever lived without you." That weekend, at a quiet park back in their hometown, under a canopy of string lights and surrounded by wildflowers planted by Wesley himself, Victor took a knee. "No cameras, no audience, just them. I've got one ring," he said, holding it out. "But 2 promises, one for you and one for him." Brielle's eyes filled. "Say them." He looked at her. I promise to never make you choose between love and peace. And I promise to be the kind of man your grandfather would have trusted. Wesley ran up, holding a bouquet of flowers he'd picked himself. Did she say yes? Brielle laughed through her tears. She absolutely did. And just like that, the man who once thought survival was the best he could hope for found himself living a life he never dared imagine, not because of money, not because of chance. Because he opened the door when someone knocked, even if she came wrapped in rain, secrets, and something he couldn't name at the time: love. The real kind, the kind that stays. Wesley ran down the hallway, trailing a ribbon behind him as Brielle adjusted the collar of her dress in the mirror. The morning sun poured through the windows of the house. They'd moved into last month, a quiet two-story place nestled between a field of wild fennel and a winding trail that led to the lake. It was the first home Victor had ever owned, not rented, not repaired for someone else. His name was on the deed, hers too. "I can't find my tie," Wesley shouted from the living room. Brielle called back, "It's on the kitchen counter next to the bowl of peaches." Victor appeared in the doorway behind her, already dressed, a dark tailored jacket hugging his shoulders, his hands adjusting the watch she'd given him. "You look like you're about to own the entire room." She met his eyes in the mirror. "Today isn't about owning anything. Still, you wear that color like a promise." She turned, smoothing the front of her dress. "You didn't shave." "I wanted to look like the man you fell for," he said. The garage grease and late nights version. She walked toward him, her heels silent on the hardwood. "You're the only man I know who could make unshaven look ceremonial." Victor smiled, then bent to kiss her forehead. "Ready? I've been ready since the moment you made me coffee in that chipped mug and told me I could stay as long as I needed." Wesley barreled back into the room, tie in hand, cheeks flushed. "I'm ready too. Can I ride in the fancy car?" Victor gave him a look. "You mean the one that doesn't have a backseat?" Wesley's face fell. Brielle crouched down, tying the ribbon into a small bow and straightening his tie. "You'll ride with me, and you'll get to press the button that lowers the windows." His eyes lit up. "Really? Really," she said, tapping his nose. The event was held at the newly opened Keaton Restoration Garage, now fully renovated and already booked for months in advance. The ribbon-cutting ceremony brought local press, car enthusiasts, and a handful of skeptical city officials who'd once doubted the project. 2 restored vehicles gleamed under the sunlight in front of the building, both finished by Victor's hands. One of them, the cherry-red convertible, was parked center stage, its license plate reading LTL Bolt. Brielle stood at the podium, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd. "This isn't just about cars, it's about legacy, about building something that lasts longer than trends or contracts. It's about giving someone a chance when no one else would." She turned to Victor, her eyes locking with his. "It's about finding the unexpected and choosing it anyway." When the applause faded and the ribbon fell, Victor slipped his hand into hers. "You didn't have to say all that. I wanted to," she said. "I've spent years being edited. Today I wanted to speak fully." He pulled her aside while guests wandered inside. "I've been thinking." "Dangerous," she teased. "I want to take you somewhere." She tilted her head. "Where?" "Back to the alley, where it started." She blinked. "Now," he nodded. "It's 5 minutes from here." She hesitated, then smiled. "Lead the way." They drove with the windows down, Wesley sitting between them in the front bench seat of the pickup Victor had spent the last 3 weekends fixing up. When they pulled up to the narrow alley behind the pharmacy, it looked smaller than Brielle remembered. The SUV was long gone. The puddle from the storm had dried up years ago, but the streetlight still flickered the same way. Victor stepped out first, then opened the door for her. "You were standing right there." She looked at the cracked pavement. "I was sitting." "Right," he said. "Wearing heels that were never meant for shortcuts." She laughed softly. "I was trying to catch a ride to the airport, and I was trying to get my kid home before his fever spiked." Victor reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I didn't do this right the first time," he said. Brielle's brows rose. "You're proposing again." He opened the box. Inside wasn't a ring, it was a brass key. She looked up at him. "It's the final key to the garage. The one that opens the storage room no one's been allowed in yet," he said. "It's yours. I want you to build something there." Something that's yours alone. She took the key, her fingers brushing his. You're not afraid I'll paint it pink and use it for yoga? I'm terrified, but I trust you. She stared at the key for a long moment, then tucked it into her purse. Then I guess I better make it count. Victor leaned against the truck, pulling her into his arms. You already have. That night, they returned to the house after dropping off the last of the guests. Wesley fell asleep in the back seat, his head tilted against the window. Inside, Victor carried him to bed while Brielle changed into a hoodie and leggings. She padded barefoot into the kitchen and started boiling water for tea. When Victor returned, he wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. I don't need a garage, she said, stirring honey into her mug. I already have everything I ever wanted. He kissed the side of her neck. You sure? Positive. They stood in silence, the hum of the kettle filling the space between them. Tomorrow, she said, I'm canceling my next board trip. Why? Because I don't want to miss Wesley's class play. He's the moon. Victor blinked. He told me he was a rock. He got upgraded, she said, grinning. He smiled, pulling her close. You're something else, Brielle Keaton. She turned in his arms, resting her forehead against his. I'm yours, that's what I am. Time passed. Victor's garage expanded, adding 2 new bays and a small showroom. Brielle stepped back from the daily operations of Keaton Luxe, choosing instead to mentor young female entrepreneurs through a nonprofit she quietly funded. Wesley won 3rd place in a science fair and asked if he could be a mechanic when he grew up, but only if I can still paint the cars. They built a life threaded in quiet choices and loud love. There were no red carpets, no press releases. Just dinners on the back porch, weekend drives in the convertible, and a boy who never once doubted that he was part of something whole. On their anniversary, Victor gave Brielle a photo album, each page a snapshot of the life they'd built. The final photo was of the alley where they met, taken from the same angle he'd first seen her. Beneath it, he'd written, "What began in the rain became my forever." And it did.